Hey, Abigail, just a quick question before we get started, if you have a second.
Yeah.
First off, nice to meet you in person or virtually anyway. But in terms of transcripts and taking minutes and stuff, I know that there's a function available on Zoom. Are we using that, or is it something else that the legislature's using these days? How are you guys doing that?
So we have something here that is taking a transcript, but we're also recording it so I can go back and then look at both and then go from there.
Gotcha. Okay. I wasn't sure how it was actually being done. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. Give it a couple minutes to get more people on here.
Len, I'm gonna also make you the co-host as well.
Sounds good. I don't think I have anything specific to share my screen with this week, but that works. Looks like we might be waiting on a couple more people here. We'll just give it another minute or two. Alicia, that looks like an awfully familiar background that I've seen awfully too many times in my life.
Yeah. The Environment Committee's first meeting was today. So
Gotcha. Looks like I think Laura is logging on now. Trying to see who we're missing here. I think we may have critical mass here. Keep me honest, everyone. Are we missing anyone that I'm forgetting here? I think we have all the regular task force members.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, good. Laura, is Eric here?
Yep, Eric is here.
All right.
All right. I think we can
Hi,
get
this
moving.
is Quad. This is Quad. I'm waiting for Steve Cadwallader.
Aha,
So
okay.
just a minute. Thank you.
We'll give another minute, Quat, and then if he doesn't join, but by then I'm sure he'll
Okay.
just catch up.
Thanks, Len.
You got it.
I'm going to warn you all, I'm a little tired today. I have been on calls since 4 a.m. this morning.
Ooh, yuck.
Whoa, why?
Because I'm part of a European group.
Oh,
And we started our meeting at 4 and just finished about an hour ago.
oh man.
Well, if you're not off, we'll try to be quiet for you.
Exactly.
That is a long day. I hope we're the last thing keeping you from something fun, like
Yeah, well, from
a glass of wine for happy hour or something.
I think sleep will be my next choice after this, but yes. I do have something after this, but I think I'll blow it off.
Seems appropriate.
Okay. I'm not seeing Steve yet, but I'm sure he'll catch up pretty quick. So if you're okay with it, Quad, we'll just we'll start off quickly with just convening the meeting. First off, thanks everyone for taking the time as usual. I think we have allotted about an hour and a half for conversation this week. And obviously, I sent out an email earlier to the task force members just outlining some proposed changes we have for the task force itself. I know we're a smaller group. Most task forces that I've seen are much larger than ours, but thankfully having a smaller group can be helpful from the standpoint of trying to be collaborative. But I did think that after some conversations I've had with some people outside of uh, the regular meetings and also just kind of looking at what we have ahead of us, I thought it did make sense to send the proposal out that I sent earlier this week, specifically creating subcommittees and formalizing the process, I think, a little more than we have been. We've had some really good conversations. I know we've worked on an outline. We've started at least some of us, I believe, have been working on a working draft of the actual report itself. But I think that it does make sense for us to put forth subcommittees, final or formalize some deadlines, and try to task out, I think, a little more formally than we have been. That way, it's not all falling on one or two people, and we all kind of share the load, so to speak, and ensure as well that everybody's voice is heard properly. So, with that, before anybody asks, no, I don't have any updates on any co-chair being assigned. We did, however, receive word from the legislature, which I think I forwarded to everyone, that we officially have an extension till April 1st, which obviously is helpful because our deadline would have been a week and 2 days ago. So we have some time, but we don't have a ton of time. So looking forward to moving forward the rest of the way with everybody and getting this done. With that, I am going to move to just public comment. If anybody has anything to open up the meeting from the public, I know Alicia's here. I see Jay Reyes. I'm not sure who that is, but invite you to speak if you'd like.
Oh, he's just my assistant clerk.
Oh, well, welcome. What actually, you know what? Let me take a step back, Abigail. Would you would you mind taking a moment to just introduce yourself and the team, just since we're all new here?
Will do. Hi guys, I'm Abigail. I'm the new clerk for the Energy and Technology Committee. So if you have any questions, just let me know.
And what's your assistant clerk's name?
So I have two assistant clerks, Josh and Francisco.
Well,
Josh
yeah,
and Francis.
they're gonna be closed by work order, closed by town, closed with.
Okay. Well, thank you. Welcome and congratulations on the new job there, and we're looking forward to working with you as well. So I'm assuming Jay Reyes is Josh, so welcome as well, and look forward to meeting you at some point in the future. Actually, in person would be nice. With that, I didn't hear anything from public comment, so I'm going to move to discussion of the proposed subcommittees. And just to kind of kick it off, as I already mentioned earlier in my opening here, we have a compressed amount of time. We still have a lot of work to do. We've made some progress. I think we've had some really good conversations. And as I said, we're kind of a smaller group, so the informal approach, I think was okay for the first portion of this task force, but I think we really need to hammer down some deadlines and I saw the need for some formality here. So I have proposed 4 different subcommittees, and I'll start off with that in terms of discussion. Specifically, just I broke them out by kind of interest groups, if you will, although I think some of our interests do overlap in certain areas: industry, environmental, government, and then a policy subcommittee, which would be made up of various representatives from the other 3 subcommittees. So just curious of if people are okay with that structure in terms of 4 subcommittees, and go from there. Then I'll open the floor to discussion.
I think it looks good.
Yeah, I agree. It looks good, and I think I want to thank you, Len, and Duncan in particular for laying it out really nicely for us. It is aggressive, but at this stage of the process, we have to be aggressive if we want to have a product together by April 1st or hopefully earlier. And just to note once again, in terms of the aggressiveness, the due date of some of the chapters, also, I know we'll get into that shortly, of February 22nd, that is 13 days away. So we have, as we have these policy committees or other committees formed, we're going to have to also be meeting in between public meetings and, be on a very aggressive course there too.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, Eric. I think that it's probably going to be imperative that the subcommittees are going to have to meet separately just to kind of work through the various sections that we're working on at any particular time. I do want to point out, I think I mentioned it earlier, we have actually started work on some of this stuff. I mean, the outline is I'll call it a very drafty draft, but it is a draft that we can work off of. In addition to that, I know that several of the members that had volunteered to try to take on some of these components and sections have already started working on it. So we haven't distributed a working draft to everybody at this point yet because I don't think it's there. But I think that the subcommittees can actually make that determination more effectively than just individual volunteers. Um, so with that, I had actually the next portion of it, barring any objections or any additions to the four subcommittees, I was going to open up the floor for nominations for the subcommittee membership. I had included just some proposals myself, just kind of off the top of my head, who seemed to make the most sense. But I'm also open to discussion on that as well. Bless you, Mariana. And I think Duncan had offered several recommendations as well. So um, feel free to jump in if anybody wants to specifically.
Do you want to
Make-
maybe
Right.
pull them up on the screen to make sure we're all looking at the same thing?
Sure, we can try to do that. Let's see here. I do have, I think, our email chain. Let's see here.
And John doesn't seem to be able to, he just sent an email. He's not able to log in. I don't know if, or to access the meeting. If Abigail or Josh, if one of you can send him the Zoom, that'd be great.
Abigail, do you have John Petrillo's contact information?
Let me look right now.
Sure.
You're in the email he just sent.
Yep, it is. It is right here too. While you're doing that, I'll try to share my screen. I do have just the email string that we sent around earlier this week. So hopefully I'll get this right. Okay, is everybody seeing this? Did everybody see this?
Yes,
Yes.
sorry, I
Yep.
was on mute.
Yes.
No worries. Okay, thank you. And just for heads up, I don't see everybody on my screen
Right.
now that I'm sharing. So if I don't call on you or if you have something to say, just jump in. So my initial proposal was literally, as I said, 3 different subcommittees, and then we could talk about the policy subcommittee. And Duncan actually sent out a nice outline that includes some of the sections of the report that we had already discussed in the outline, some of the due dates that he's proposing here. So first off, I just want to tackle the subcommittee members. Does anybody have any objections on the first 3, which would be the policy, or I'm sorry, the industry committee, the government committee, or the environmental subcommittee?
It looks good.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the first 3.
Yep, the policy committee is.
And it sounds like the policy is, you said, a mixture of people. But I'm
Yeah,
a little
that's
worried about Duncan's proposal, how often my name is on it, because I surely don't have a lot of time between now and then. Although I'm definitely looking at myself as a a split personality because I'm thinking of myself as Alicia as well.
And I just for clarification, I know Alicia and John have been on, I think, almost every single call. Obviously, I didn't include them in the proposed subcommittees, but that's only because I was trying to keep it very specifically to the task force members that have been appointed. That said, obviously, throughout this entire process, we've been inviting conversation and discussion from both John and Alicia, and I would be personally, very much in favor of and happy if they joined subcommittee meetings as well, as members of the public and whatnot. So, Eric, I do see your hand up. Why don't you jump in?
Yeah, it was, and I think this all looks good, except I did have one question. Do we need a government committee?
I think there are certain segments, at least this is my perspective on it. The reason why I had proposed it, I think there are certain segments that maybe some government, and I call it government, because it's kind of a mix, I think, of Pura, Deep, and Green Bank as well. But there are some components I think that would be valuable that those of you who are actually in government work can provide, things like if we need to discuss things like dam safety policy or current regulations that are included in dam safety, um, environmental regulations that currently overseen by DEEP, maybe some of the policy initiatives that are implemented and overseen by the Green Bank that may be valuable to input into the report. And the way I had viewed it is that there's a little bit of a different flavor, I think, from the government side than specifically the environmental NGO side or the industry side. But that said, I'm certainly open to discussion on that.
Yeah, well, I feel like all the examples you just mentioned are things that if the policy committee is going to be discussing those, I wouldn't split a government committee out from some of those discussions, and it could be more just helping to inform the policy committee questions that might come up. Understanding that, of course, those of us who represent, state agencies might have certain things that we can't commit to, but hopefully to provide good information that can assist those committees.
So would you recommend just eliminating the proposed government subcommittee and just combining into the other three, if you will?
I would, because I don't see a government subcommittee in this instance, needing to meet or to work on elements of a report, or I think just more being plugged in and aware of, and if not contributing to providing counsel to those other sections.
Understood. I'm okay with that. With that proposed amendment to my proposal. I'm curious if anybody else has any thoughts on that.
Pura has been helpful in providing some information about class one projects that are class one in Connecticut right now, and about existing programs that are out there. So that's all very good. But that being said, it doesn't mean that we have to have government subcommittee. So I'm okay with not having a government subcommittee.
Okay. Well, in that case, then, barring any objections, I would say that maybe we just eliminate that, pare it down to three subcommittees. Kind of an industry perspective versus, I don't want to say versus that's adversarial, an industry perspective, and then an environmental perspective, and then go from there and combine portions of both to a policy committee, which we can discuss in a moment. But with that, I would just I think that's how we move forward. In terms of the membership, I think my initial membership for the other subcommittees included, I'm sorry, just scrolling down here. Myself, Steve, and Duncan as part of the industry subcommittee. I would recommend or offer that maybe Pura and Deep in an advisory role or consulting role would be helpful to have on that subcommittee as well. I'm not sure, Pura, if Quat or Stephen, if you have any specific thoughts on that, but I would welcome your input as well. Sounds like maybe they're not on. I can't see any if they're here or not, but
They're here, but muted. But I think that makes sense. Is
Okay.
to if other representatives of agencies are comfortable with that, I think distributing us across the various subcommittees makes sense.
Okay.
Address. I don't want them to come to my house and
And
knowing
Eric,
I don't have a gun.
it sounds like Steve's trying to say something.
No, I don't want to be threatened by the bad guys. They don't need to know.
Hi, Len and the group. Sorry, I had trouble getting off mute there. Yeah, it's fine being more of an advisory in a position to provide information rather than
So I don't think
putting in its 2 cents with regard to policy or anything else.
Anyway, they didn't want me.
That sounds good, Stephen. Sounds like you have a lot of background noise there too, so appreciate it. Okay. Eric, do you have any preference in terms of, I mean, do you want to spread yourself to both groups, or do you prefer to work with?
Yeah, I mean, in looking at what Duncan had put together, if you don't mind going to that on the screen, I mean, I thought the way that that was set up made sense to me. I think unfortunately that might mean that I'm in every subcommittee, but still, I that considering Deep's engagement across those areas, that makes sense.
That sounds good to me. I didn't want to volunteer you for everything, but I appreciate that, Eric. So then I will establish, or we'll establish formally. I won't take a vote. Unless people think it makes sense to, but it doesn't sound like there are any objections. So maybe we could say this is unanimous nominations for the first 2 committees, which are, for lack of a better way to put it, the industry subcommittee, which includes Pira, Eric from Deep, myself, Duncan, and Steve Zaretti. And then the environmental subcommittee, which includes Laura, Eric, and representatives from Pira as well. Any objections there? If not, we'll mark it down. From there, of course, comes I think the larger discussion, the policy subcommittee, which may wind up including almost everyone or everyone, depending on how things shake out. I had proposed initially, actually, I don't think I had proposed any specifics on the policy subcommittee. I see Duncan did. I'm going to open it up for discussion with regard to Duncan's proposal, just to start it off. And feel free to jump in. Like I said, I can't necessarily see hands.
Well, just to break the silence,
Here we go.
Mariana suggested making the due date earlier because of internal approvals that need to be done with some organizations out there. So you might be looking at a February 22 deadline for policy as well, if that sounds good.
Well,
Yeah,
before we
thanks.
get to the deadlines, I did want to stick with the membership specifically because in my mind, deadlines are almost a separate conversation as well, just to ensure we're all on the same page moving forward. But I want to make sure I know we know who's actually going to be participating in these in this final subcommittee.
Yep, I'm good with that. I mean, I'm good participating. I'll only speak for myself,
Okay.
but
And I know, Laura, I don't want to volunteer you, but I had thought that you would make a lot of sense to be on the policy subcommittee to lend your voice in terms of more of an environmental perspective.
Yeah, in the sense that I want to be able to be reflective of some of the recommendations of the people I've been getting guidance from. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And then from an industry perspective, I actually have an interest myself. I know Duncan had volunteered himself specifically. I had an interest in being part of the policy discussion as well. Um, but I also don't want to overwhelm the policy subcommittee with more representation than is needed. So I'm curious.
I think it makes sense to add you. I'm also hoping, so I think the big thing there from like the policy subgroup is going to be the recommendations. And I'm hoping that we can have some discussion with all members so that everybody sort of feels comfortable with the recommendations and hopefully like a subcommittee can take the pen to writing those. But so that we can have as much support from the entire task force, and we'll see where we'll get with that. So I have no problem with adding you to sort of any subcommittee that helps to draft and capture everything that we talk about in the task force into those recommendations.
Thank you, Mariana. Anybody else?
Len, if you don't want to be on it, I would certainly be communicating with you and Steve Z, and also John, not a member, but also active, and gaining ideas and thoughts from you folks, and try to put them together with the subcommittee. But whether you're in it or not is, I'm neutral on that. Whatever you would like to do on that is fine with me.
I think I might have forgot to mention Eric as well, who poor Eric volunteered for everything. So
Yeah, no, I know that's part of the deal, but I was going to just say, like, I didn't see John or Steve on this, on particular subcommittees, and obviously they should identify what. Oh, I guess I see Steve there on the industry subcommittee, but it would certainly love to have them both engaged wherever they want to be engaged. And I would say, Len, and I'm sorry for saying this, but I totally agree with Mariana. I think it would be best if you were on the policy subcommittee too, as we talk through these issues. So no one has to liaison with you as Duncan generously offered, but just to, for the efficiency of being able to get right to as close to consensus as we can find.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. I see John has his hand raised. John, why don't you jump in?
Thanks, Len. And I just assume that the membership here is for the official members of the task force. I'm happy to support, this process wherever it makes most sense. Obviously, as an industry rep, there's some clear ties there. And I think Mariana's observation or suggestion that the policy discussion be very broad to include everyone and maybe even sequence so that, it's a little bit more of an organic and natural discussion as we kind of really laid out the pros and cons, kind of the existing situation that we're trying to address. To me, I think the policy discussion would just be much better informed if we kind of had the groundwork laid first, and then as a group had a discussion. And if we can develop recommendations that we're all comfortable with, that's spectacular.
John, just to address two things. One, I didn't include I didn't include members of the public and the task force subcommittees very specifically, just because I kept it official. But you're absolutely, I think I said this before, I don't think anybody's would object to having yourself, Alicia, or anybody else who wants to weigh in, try to join and help out. We'd love to have you.
Great. Yeah, my feelings aren't hurt, and I figured Alicia and I would go.
Yeah, and by the way, I can I just chime in, because I was not trying to exclude you, Alicia, in any way, shape, or form. I thought, and I clearly misremembered, that John had been appointed. But I do think it makes sense to not have members of the public as official members of the members of the task force that are assigned to work on subcommittees, but certainly we should welcome if there are members of the public that want to join in or contribute in some way, shape, or form. I agree. I think that's helpful.
Yeah, John and Alicia are both not on, but I'm definitely going to be using Alicia for anything related to policy. So the policy group, if you don't see me actively there, it will likely be that Alicia is there in my stead.
We're both blonde and, we're kind of interchangeable.
Exactly. Just collect,
Yeah.
squeeze
No one
your
will notice.
Glasses. I see it. I see it.
Exactly.
I'm
Squint
gonna put
your
Laura
eyes a
Wildman
little.
under mine.
You're
And thanks,
almost
Eric.
sweet.
I don't have to be sad for the rest of the day now.
Okay.
I brought up the agenda very quickly, John, just because you also mentioned trying to segment this out and have a more engaged discussion from the larger group. I do have three of the specific proposals we've already kind of raised on the agenda for today, if we get to them, of course, but we can continue that discussion and try to work through some of these policy recommendations. Or I think we had come to the language that they were policy considerations rather than recommendations at this point. And then obviously with the policy subcommittee, when they're writing it, can take that into account and try to detail as well as we can for the legislature with the report. So if we can get through these portions of the agenda, we can certainly get right to that this week and start hammering away at some of this stuff. Okay, so in terms of the policy subcommittee, I have written down myself, Duncan, Mariana, Laura, and Eric, which gives some respite to Pura and some respite to Steve Zaretti, if they're happy with that.
No complaints, Len.
Gotcha. Okay. So then moving through that, I'm going to bring the helpful table that Duncan put together up here. Just moving into deadlines. So obviously we have a limited number of weeks before the legislative JF deadline for the Energy Committee. And I don't know if Abby, if you can jump on here quickly, what is the JF deadline, the actual date? Is it the 26th of March?
Yes, you're correct.
Okay, so March 26th is the JF deadline. Now we have until April 1st to get a report out.
Sorry, what's JF?
Oh, I'm sorry. In the legislature with the committees, they have basically a deadline to report bills out of the committee and move it along in the process. So before that, you'll have public hearings. The committee will actually come together and vote on the various bills that are before them, and whatever they decide to do with each bill. If the bill is going to move forward in the process, they have to essentially issue what's called a joint favorable report.
Joint favorable. Okay, thank you.
JF is joint favorable. So both members of the Senate and the House vote in the joint committee to advance or not advance a bill. So that deadline this year is March 26th.
Don't you have to worry more about the raised bill deadline?
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there was a bill raised by the committee yesterday, or
There was, yeah.
Yesterday.
There was, but I think there's also the deadline for a public hearing. So if the language and recommendations don't come out before then.
So it's a subject matter, as I understand, it's a subject matter bill. That was what I had read. Okay. Obviously, given our compressed time frame, we may not have specific recommendations to offer. The final report, I highly doubt we'll have ready before the public hearing opportunity. But if we do have recommendations that we can discuss more generally before the legislature, and it's valuable for them to have us come and speak to them at a public hearing, that is certainly a viable option.
Okay.
You know what that existing new bill says that just came out? It's just very general.
It's very general. I read it briefly. I don't know if anybody has it in front of them, but
I have it if you want me to read it off.
yeah, you know what, that would be helpful, Abigail.
I'm not sure if it's a placeholder or not, but it just says an act concerning solicitation of run-of-the-river hydropower, if that's the one you're referring to.
That's what I had seen. Now, I'm not sure to your point, I haven't heard from Representative Steinberg or Senator Needleman if that is what the intention of that bill is, or if it's something else. But from a subject matter point of view, it would afford us the opportunity to very specifically talk about our findings, or at least our preliminary findings as a task force at a public hearing if that's warranted.
That's all it says is an act regarding solicitation, Runner River Hydro.
They've only raised concepts right now, Duncan, so there's no language in most of the bills that were raised right now in any of the committees.
I see. And then these bills can get more detailed wordage, and then after detailed wordage, there is usually public hearing. Is that how it goes?
Generally speaking, yes. Not always.
Not always.
There
Right.
can be subject matter public hearings as well. There are many different ways that legislative language can be drafted and massaged over the course of the session.
Right. Well, certainly during that public hearing time, any group or organization can go in and say their thing about their concerns or comments or recommendations regarding hydro in general, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I don't think that anybody on this task force is somehow restricted from representing their organization on any issue. But I think what I was trying to reference was if there's value in the task force testifying as the task force before the legislature, I would take my direction from the chairs to see if that's valuable, or if they want us to continue just working on the report and get it to them as soon as we could.
Good.
And right now, the session ends in early May. Is that the schedule?
Yes. Yeah, it's a
Okay.
short session. So with regard to the deadlines themselves, with all of that kind of in mind, and I apologize for not giving a better background to those of you who don't spend a lot or too much time in the legislative office building like some of us do. We do have a proposal from Mariana to actually push the policy subcommittee to work on a deadline ahead of the end of February. That would certainly give us the opportunity to offer up recommendations if we can come to that solution, probably prior to the end of the public hearing season, although it would be tight, but that would potentially be the case. Is that something that we want to try to push for, or do we want to walk it through in a more deliberate fashion and allow for more conversation?
That would be just changing the date on the Duncan table on policy to February 22nd instead of March 6th.
It
And
looks like
maybe only on the policy recommendations section of that, the VI, so that organizations can get their approvals from others, like Mariana suggested, and give them time to do that. That's what we're talking about here,
yes.
right? I'm
And
okay with that. And
I don't want to put you on the spot, Mariana, but maybe you want to kind of explain
Yeah,
your process and whatnot.
I don't know my process. That's part of what I'm inquiring, and I don't, and it's sort of one of those things that it depends on what the recommendations are. But I'm guessing that Green Bank and Deep and maybe others also have to go through sort of some internal process to sign off on recommendations, which is why I suggested let's move the deadline so that we can see if these can be consensus recommendations or not, depending on that process. But also based on what you're talking about now in terms of the public hearings, if we feel like we can share some recommendations ahead of having all of the report completed, it might be good to pull that up. I think one of the key things that comes in mind to be able to achieve that February 22nd deadline is being able to sort of, at least at a high level, discuss with the group here what those recommendations are going to be like today, maybe next Friday, and then have a few days for the subcommittee to type it up as quickly as possible.
No, I appreciate that.
All right, I'm ready to get to work and do that. I've already drafted some things that I can send to the policy committee and just toss around some ideas on our recommendations and see if we can get that done by next meeting. I'm ready to do that.
I think well, it looks like Eric has his hand up, I think.
Yeah. So I'm first of all, Mariana is 100% right that agencies will need some time to ensure that any proposals get vetted and we get lots of internal input. But I also agree with the point that John made earlier that the policy recommendations should really flow from what comes out of those subcommittees. So I guess I wouldn't change it. I would leave it at March 6th. I think we're going to be tested enough to try to hit February 22nd with the subcommittee recommendations. And I think it's realistic to keep it, even though hopefully we'll have a really good sense of, what would be developed by March 6th at that point. I don't know that we could do all of those things simultaneously. So that's just my sense, trying to be realistic.
So
Yeah,
in my
that
mind,
makes sense. I think if what I'm hearing you're saying, Eric, is if we push the policy recommendations to have those ready before, and we want sort of consensus with the group, some of the other items we might push back a little bit to give us time to focus on that.
Go ahead, John. I want to make sure I was capturing your sentiment correctly from before, but you might have other thoughts.
No, I think you said it better than I did, Eric. So thanks. I guess I was just wondering, it makes sense to me. Everyone has their own kind of internal governance, requirements, and Green Bank and DEP, you need time to go through that. The only other government entity I see kind of as a participant here is Pura. I'm just curious, what if there are similar considerations or something different that we need to be just thinking about relative to timing there. And I don't know who the rep is.
Yeah, this is Steve Cadwallader with Pura. Our anticipation is that we wouldn't be making recommendations with regard to policy, so I don't see us as needing a process to vet that internally in Pura. We're looking to provide information as the committee needs it, particularly on ratepayer benefits and costs.
Okay, thanks, Steve. I know you said that before, and I guess I just.
So in terms of the report itself, I mean, we do obviously want to provide considerations or recommendations, whatever you want to call it, if we can. I understand being government and quasi-governmental organizations, Green Bank, Pura, and Deep all have some limitations in terms of what they can offer and support, and it may take a heck of a lot longer than the next month and a half for them to get approvals if that's even in the cards at all. I think one of the reasons why we said policy considerations instead of recommendations is just kind of a laundry list of things that could be considered by the legislature and kind of list out essentially what the value is in doing it, in taking that certain approach, or what the detriment would be, et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of getting approvals for a policy recommendation, in my mind, that seems to avoid that necessity, although I certainly don't work for any of those agencies, so I can't speak to that specifically. If that continues to be a problem or a hurdle for us, is there another alternative way for us to be able to frame considerations and not put Deep, Pura, and the Green Bank into a position where they have to bow out of the task force, if you will, or not put their names to it? John, looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm wondering if one way to get there, Len, would be to construct kind of a crosswalk between some of the concerns, the environmental drawbacks, and the benefits, as well as the challenges, right? And that could help us really sort of line up where are the problem areas, and what can be, what are the potential, ways to address those or approach those. That might be, one way to start framing, additional action.
Thanks, John. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think that, obviously on the matrix that we're looking at on the screen, it says policy recommendations, and I think policy considerations, as you mentioned before, Len, is definitely easier for us to wrestle with. But I think also in the policy considerations too, we should be offering kind of pros and cons, right, on different recommendations. What does this mean? Because if we're not able to achieve consensus on even in how we capture considerations, sometimes there may be different opinions. I think as long as we capture those in the along with the policy considerations in that chapter, and make it clear that there are, here's some positive things. Here's maybe some, other things that might be a result from making, a change in this way or the other. I think that helps to provide, for a more balanced report. And again, one that's a little bit easier for agencies to be a part of.
I think you and I are on the same page, Eric, when it comes to considerations, because that's exactly what I want to do is assure that if there are some considerations we want to list out, there are going to be some, if you will, pros and cons depending on the perspective. And I want to make sure that our report reflects those perspectives adequately, which I think is an issue that Laura raised concerns with a couple weeks ago. So I think any considerations that we list out have to have that information attached to it for the legislature to be able to take into account, in addition to whatever they hear from constituents and public hearing information, et cetera. So in terms of the deadline itself, I'm okay with the 3/6. I've heard from Eric having concerns about the realistic deadline. Obviously, Duncan wants to get this done last week. And I'm curious if Laura or representatives from Pura or Mariana have any responses to that. Or Steve, I think I forgot Steve. My apologies, Steve.
Responses to the date change or responses to how we write up the.
No, to the deadline very specifically, 3/6 or 2/22, essentially.
Yeah, again, I'm going to be relying on Alicia a lot for policy and the other group of folks that have been helping give us input on policy to this date. So I'm curious, Alicia, what do you think about that date? About moving that date up?
Well, I think, I think it depends on how many policy considerations we're looking at. And if we are going to move forward on all policy considerations that are brought forth, or just a few. As far as trying to get things to the legislature here. So I think it's going to depend.
I think as of right now, my count, and feel free to jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have 3 proposals on the table that have been brought up over the course of the last few weeks, very specifically to address small and, well, I should say just hydropower in general in the state as a consideration. There may be a 4th that's not necessarily a policy that they need to change in the law, just more of a broad approach to things, but 3 or 4, I think, is the most we've had so far.
And Len, are you referring to the document that we submitted as well, the one that I sent into the group? Or are you talking about some other thing in your head right now, other like policies in your head that I haven't seen?
No, the policy considerations that we've actually discussed. I think most of the things that we've discussed, now I'll list them out. Duncan's idea of a tariff. Mariana had brought out procurement authority as a consideration. And then, forgive me, I'm just going to pull up the expansion of the RPS was a 3rd. And I believe, now, obviously I don't know everything that was in the document you sent, but does that, I look at those as having to include some of the policy considerations that you've included, which are, in my mind, almost guardrails and limitations to various changes across.
Maybe, but I don't feel like I have this list in my head, this list you're talking about. I think we've kind of been all over the place in some of these meetings. So I'd like clarity on that. I'd like a list of what you're thinking of right now, and I'd like to see how that incorporates the document that I put forward as well.
I don't
Or
think I
the
incorporated it specifically. I think it was these were three topics that we've talked about briefly. I did put on the agenda for today, those
Yeah.
three specifics. And then what I was hoping for was that you and Alicia and Deep and others could bring in those perspectives very specifically.
Yeah, so I mean, at least my recollection of all the last meetings was not that we had done some kind of extensive list of what kind of policy discussions we have. And so I would not have limited it to these three, obviously, because I don't see any reflection of the document that I put forward earlier. So whatever, as long as I'm on the policy group and can discuss that.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to keep you out, Laura. I mean,
No, I didn't think you were. I didn't think you were. I'm just letting you know how I'm kind of reflecting back on things right now versus these three things that you have here.
Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, well, I'll say Duncan had his physical hand up first. So Duncan, why don't you go, and then I'll go after you.
All right, thank you. So, our charge to report on the situation of hydro in Connecticut, I'm hoping that this report kind of shows how some of these small existing hydros are having a hard time and they're not up to par with what the other New England states are doing. Connecticut is really lacking. And our idea to maybe try to put an idea out there of trying to support environmentally good hydro projects. And the way to do that, in my mind, is to improve the rates and the class 1 RECs that these small existing projects can have. So, I'd like to just try to keep it simple, and we can discuss just that, of giving them certain types of projects. The class 1 provision that they don't have now for small existing, the tariff availability that they don't have now, and then the solicitation idea that is a good idea for taking care of projects that are in the state. So I'm just hoping that we can, work on simple policy issues like that. If there's others, I'm all ears, but the idea is to see what the situation is with hydro in Connecticut, to figure out what to do about it, if something should be done, and then put some considerations forward on that.
Thanks, Duncan. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, and I think that's really good, Duncan. I just to note, I was happy to see in the agenda for today, a separation between the tariff and hydropower procurement issues, which are, often get confused with one another. So I appreciate those as two separate items to talk through. But also, Len, you may not have been able to see this while you're sharing your screen here, but the other item that we talked about, at least briefly, was pairing opportunities with hydro and other intermittent renewables, which I know is of particular interest to you. And also, Laura, just so you know, on the draft outline that went around, there was a category for others. So if there are other suggestions here, we should definitely put them on the table. And you're right, as the policy committee gets together, let's certainly make sure to do that.
Thanks, Eric. John, I see your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. I think just to address Laura's note about making sure that some of the material that they put together is reflected here. I guess the way I would look at this, Laura, is sort of like an if-then situation, or like if you meet these criteria, then you have some things available to you to help you. And then like to unpack that a little bit more, I think if we establish the criteria that we feel are important in terms of performance, right? And that could be not only power, but non-power situations. Then these programs could potentially be set up to, acknowledge those values for projects that are already doing that, and try to get the projects that aren't doing that make sense, able to improve themselves. So we get the projects that we want, the operations that we want. But right now, without without a financial mechanism to allow those investments and those changes, we're kind of stuck with what we have. So I guess that's one way to look at this, like how could we think about, recommendations or policies that might, result in that net improvement, both in, domestic power supply, but also the way they're interacting with the environment.
Thanks, John. And I see Shannon Ames has joined us and has her hand raised. How you doing, Shannon?
I'm well. First of all, I apologize for joining late, so I didn't introduce myself earlier. But for those who don't know me, I'm Shannon Ames. I'm the executive director of the Low Impact Hydropower Institute. I wanted to introduce myself and offer myself as a resource to the extent that that's useful. And the reason that I really raised my hand was just to respond gently to Duncan and just highlight the fact that we've looked at and reviewed hydropower facilities, over 300 of them in 24 states now. And there's no correlation between size and environmental impact. Like statistically, there is zero correlation there. So there are many reasons to choose size as a threshold for hydropower, but it would be misleading to think that size is some kind of reflection on environmental impact. So just wanted to throw that in, but also, again, I'm here to the point that it could be useful, but it's good work and happy to help if I can. Thank you.
Laura, I see you raising your hand. Thank you, Shannon.
Yeah, and just to emphasize that, I brought up before that while obviously smaller hydro isn't necessarily smaller environmental impact, in many ways we view smaller hydro as a larger environmental impact because it has less economic value and yet it spreads out the impacts into a lot more systems than larger scale hydro. So.
Anybody else?
Len, I'd like to go back into sort of the list of policy considerations and throw one in there that I think I'd sent a while back, which is in regards to some tweaks to the NRES tariff for new hydropower projects. And that's the NRES, non-residential renewable energy solutions program.
What might be helpful, I think, just in terms of for the policy subcommittee in particular to kind of get more into the weeds, but also for our discussion purposes, I had listed just these three for discussion topics today, and probably, judging by the time, probably next week as well. But other policy topics such as the NRES tariff, Eric did mention pairing hydro with other renewables and whatnot, which is something that I'd raised before and was sort of half-heartedly alluding to in our previous or in this current conversation. But it may make sense to try to send out before our next meeting for the discussion topic, either to me to disseminate or to the group as a whole, just so that we kind of have an understanding behind the scenes as to what we're thinking of. I think we have discussed to a degree the tariff proposal. We've discussed to a degree the RPS change and also to a degree the existing hydropower procurements. And obviously we have not discussed what Laura had sent out. So I think Laura, you've already shared that document. It's probably in everybody's email, but it may be a good idea to bring that back up. And Laura, if you could point specifically just for my when I make the agenda for next week, so I can include very specifically the topics you want to discuss, just let me know. That way I don't miss anything.
Sure thing.
That would be helpful. And in terms of the deadlines, I don't think we've actually fully decided, February 22nd or March 6th in terms of the policy subcommittee deadline. I think I've heard from several of you. I don't know if anybody has any other objections. I think I know that time is of the essence, but at the same time, we need to be realistic as well. So
Let me ask this, if you, the agencies, had this done by March the 6th, would you be able to get approvals from your upper people by the deadline of the report that we are saying is March 22nd? Is that definitely doable?
Wish I could say it was definitely doable, Duncan. But I have no idea. There are probably going to be a lot of, now that we're in this session, there are going to be a lot of different things that are going to be considered. And all I can say is I'll certainly try to get that kind of input as quickly as I possibly can. But I wish I could say, sure, yeah, 2 weeks, no problem. But I really can't.
Well, then I'd really like to have us try to get the policy part done sooner than March the 6th. I mean, guys, I think we can do it. I'll send you some wording. Let's toss it around and hammer it out and get it done. I just like to get on with the program and get it done and stay within a reasonable due date. So what about something in between March the 6th and February 22nd?
I think there's is it a leap year? I think we have an extra day in February, which is nice. February 29th, maybe, for the policy subcommittee.
I think that makes sense, but I think let's sort of walk it back. If we want to have the 29th for those recommendations to be completed, and I think from what I've heard from others is that we want this group to be able to at least have time to discuss all the considerations, pros, cons, sort of how we've arrived to them. Let's say we have currently about, 3 to 5 policy considerations. I think if we focus on at least 3 of them on the week of the 16th and 2 on the week of the 23rd, so that they can then be sort of put into shape. And in the meantime, the policy subgroup can work on language. That seems doable. But mindful that to be able to accomplish that, we will need to be sort of focused on what we want to discuss in our next, and I don't know if we'll have time today, and on the 16th and on the 23rd. So would require a little bit of prep work ahead of that.
On that note, actually,
I think it would definitely be helpful to have proposed language if we're going to consider anything at the next meeting. Yeah, and I know Mariana, you and Eric had worked on the request for proposals. That looked pretty almost final draftish, and it'll just be helpful to look at those proposals a little bit more fleshed out.
Alicia, that was well said. And it's actually kind of where I wanted to go with this as well, is if people can send proposals that are actually, as close to final draft as they think they can get, would be very beneficial ahead of the meeting, just because then at least we don't have to spend the time, trying to explain too much of what it is. It's more an understanding coming into it, and potentially the ability to discuss it with others as well ahead of the meeting and try to come up with a position. I think that's totally doable. So I would propose that, just keep me honest, February 29th, is that actually a Friday? Or is it is? Okay, thank you. I don't have a calendar in front of me. So I
No,
would
it's not. It's a
Oh.
Thursday. Sorry. 29th is a Thursday.
Well, actually, that works perfectly because we meet on Friday. So maybe the February 29th being the date itself for a policy committee, a subcommittee, at least a pretty close to draft
Final
form.
draft. Yeah.
Any objections?
I like that.
Okay. Be the only time I ever say thankful. I'm thankful for an extra day in February. Um,
Mariana, can you send the the draft language that you put together? I don't think I saw that.
I will. I think it has to do with sort of who's on what chains. So yes, I'll send it over.
I'm only in some of these emails, I guess.
Now I know to look for you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so the deadlines I think are generally set, or at least agreed upon. What am I looking at here? There we go. So just to kind of go back to the agenda here, moving forward, unless there are objections with regard to deadlines, I think we're good. Discussion of policy considerations offered today, and as I said, this is certainly not exhaustive or comprehensive, but these are the things that came to my head that we probably discussed, I think, the most to this point. We could take them out of order if preferred. I know that Mariana had sent out a pretty good write-up as to what the procurement would look like. It may make sense to save that for next week because we have a pretty good write-up, but we don't have it in front of us at this point. I think the other two we've discussed quite a bit. I would propose we start off with the tariff proposal and go from there. So if people are prepared to actually discuss it. Go ahead, Duncan.
Right, so this would be similar to Steinberg's bill that didn't pass, and just simply give certain type of hydro a standard rate equal to the retail rate, or it would be a tariff similar to what Massachusetts does. So now we have to define, well, what type of projects would we offer this to? Would it be existing, recently decommissioned, and or unpowered? I think that maybe we're talking about existing and recently decommissioned. Just personally, I would think that we can handle, if we want to, handle unpowered projects in the procurement section. So anyway, the first one, hydropower tariff proposal, is just that, offering certain types of hydro the retail rate for their energy. So then you say, well, who should we offer this to? Should it be, under 3.5 megawatts? Should it be only projects in the state? And these are the things that we need to hash out. So those are my ideas on the hydropower tariff proposal.
Thanks, Duncan. Any specific thoughts on this proposal? Go ahead, Mariana.
John, maybe I'll let you go first and then I'll jump in.
Okay. Duncan, when you talk about a tariff, what products are you thinking about would be included or conveyed in the tariff?
Right, of the three things that generators produce, energy, capacity, and RECs, I'd say this is just the energy component.
Okay, so just the energy. So the generator would retain rights to the capacity, whatever that might be, if there is any,
Right.
and any environmental attributes, which there may or may not be as well.
Right, the RECs we are maybe going to talk about in the second one here, talking about modifying the RPS Connecticut Class 1.
And who would the off-taker be? The utility?
On the tariff?
Yeah.
I don't know. It has to be figured out. I'm not really an expert in that, but some way, somehow, make that happen, like the other states are doing.
Yeah, think about like Massachusetts small hydro program is essentially kind of part of their net metering, which is like a remote or virtual net metering program. And in a case like that, there might be a possibility to kind of beneficially link a project with an entity or entities to provide discount from what they would see on the retail bill, and also a benefit to the generator. And if they're, I could envision a program where, this would benefit low and moderate income communities or other, maybe even state entities, and just looking for a way to, if we're going to get a full retail rate, making sure that benefit, goes beyond the project. And we really are kind of finding, a little bit more of the community benefit within that structure.
Right, well, maybe we're getting a bit detailed, something that the policy committee, subcommittee will be working on. I don't really know how all that works, but a tariff is something that is being done by others. And net energy billing can be done just by looking at the powerhouse itself. There you have a powerhouse sitting there. If there's no water in the river, not enough to run, then you're consuming electricity. Otherwise, you're generating electricity. So you could have a meter that goes both ways. And then at the end of the month, if you owe money, you pay. If they owe you money, then they pay you. So that would be a very simple net energy billing example.
So I'll jump in here, and where I think it becomes challenging, Duncan, and where the precedent that you're stating is in states like Massachusetts that have virtual net metering, so that if you are overproducing behind the load, that can be assigned to other folks that are purchasing that electricity, and therefore the owner of that system is basically through a virtual net metering agreement or power purchase agreement selling that electricity to that other off-taker. And it is my understanding in Connecticut that virtual net metering does not exist in the same way that it exists in Massachusetts, and that those technologies that are sort of grandfathered into net metering, like solar, are because they are consuming less than 100% of what they're generating on site. Otherwise, they're getting sort of the same rate that hydro would be getting, the wholesale rate. And so if we're talking about a virtual net, like allowing the retail rate because of virtual net metering, it seems like we have a bigger problem, which is that we don't have virtual net metering in Connecticut. And I'm not sure that this is sort of the right task force to tackle virtual net metering.
And I think the distinction you're making is sort of like the behind the meter net metering, right? Where you have solar panels on your house and, that sort of nets out. But what I was mentioning is maybe a modification to the tariff that Duncan was proposing is sort of front of the meter, where the benefit from the generator's meter can be assigned to a different account. And that's done in multiple states. That's really an accounting thing. It's not really an equipment issue. Maybe a meter upgrade, but those are really not a big deal. We do that in Vermont, New Hampshire. We do it in Rhode Island. One plant services 7 schools. So it's definitely possible, even with Eversource is one of our net metering utilities in Massachusetts.
John, does the power producer have to run around and find these customers, and the power producer have to worry about getting that check in the mail, or no?
Sometimes, yeah. In every state except for Massachusetts, you've got to make the owner has to go and find that customer, negotiate separate kind of terms and contract. And it requires an accounting department essentially to keep track of all that. So the Massachusetts program is a little bit different because it just allows for a direct pay from the utility to the generator. The other states require that you come as kind of as a partnership.
Well, in that sense, I like the Massachusetts one better. We have very small power producers out there that, they're having a hard time. They can't put much time into this, but I hear what you're saying, and you have some good ideas there, John, and we'll hash it out with the subcommittee.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just a separate idea. Just, the net metering concept is maybe just different and distinct from a tariff.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Want to talk about the Rex idea next?
Well, before we move, I just want to make sure we've captured everybody's talking points or thoughts on this. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add.
I wouldn't until I see a full proposal for something like this. I think there's still a lot of unanswered.
Fair enough.
There isn't enough information to fully.
On which projects would get this, you mean? Or what's the concern?
No, just what the proposal would look like, the full proposal on what a tariff.
Right.
Did you send out a document that I'm missing? Is this? Okay.
No,
It's
I
not
haven't
yet.
yet.
Okay.
No, but I will soon to the subcommittee.
From a regulatory perspective, and I don't know if Pura can add anything here, is that allowed? That front of the meter net metering?
This is Steve Cadwallader from Pura. I don't think we have it now. We used to have it, but not anymore. But certainly if the legislature decreed that there should be this program, then I guess we would implement it at Pura.
Thank you.
I think the one thing to consider is if we open this up to hydropower, everybody else is gonna, like all other technologies would probably question or potentially want, it would set a precedent for other technologies to do the same thing. Or to want the same thing, which is a sort of consideration.
You know, for years, solar has had their program that has not been well suited for hydro. So we're saying, please bring up hydro up to speed and make it more of a level playing field than it has been for years. So I think solar is being treated very well in Connecticut from what I know with that program they have. But, you know,
What program are you referring to? The net metering?
the residential, what is it, SREL? Residential, where they put in bids and get what you said, like their 14
Like
cents
the
or whatever.
NRES program?
Right.
Well, so hydro is eligible for that as well.
For new projects.
Same as solar, new projects.
Yeah, not existing projects, which is the problem I'm trying to
I
emphasize.
understand, but I guess you're kind of talking apples and oranges. You want something for existing hydro
Right.
and saying existing solar doesn't have that either. It has other existing solar, unless they would have been sort of approved under those other programs, would be, if you had a 30-year-old solar project, you would also be getting retail rates.
Right.
Unless it's behind the load. So
I mean, the
that's where
unpowered,
if we open up for virtual net meter, I just want to, it's a consideration that if you're sort of opening up for virtual net metering for hydro projects, other projects like solar, fuel cells, wind, it creates a precedent for them to want the same thing. And I don't know what the implications are of that on the grid and on ratepayers, especially if they don't need to go out and look for off takers that we have to be mindful of.
It does open up a question in my mind. I mean, we don't have many 30-year-old solar facilities yet that are front of the meter, but we will have them at some point. And the question will become, what do you do with them? And, you know, a lot of times they may be at the end of their life cycle and they can repower with, you know, better technology or something like that. But that is a question that'll come up for sure. But also it's not necessarily irrelevant because we are going to have some of these that are going to come off the programs, and the state of Connecticut is going to have to figure out what they want to do and how they want to approach them. So that may be something that we can put into the consideration. And to your point, Mariana, it is part of it. But it may not be a bad thing for them to at least start talking about, not only from a hydro perspective, but also from another existing renewable perspective when they start to run out of their initial contracts and whatnot. Go ahead, Eric.
So just looking at the time and knowing we have about 13 minutes left today, and then obviously an aggressive time frame going forward, I want to go back to a recommendation that I think Mariana made earlier, which I thought was a very good one. And that is, you know, if we have 5 proposals, and maybe there are others, Laura, or others that are not yet on the list, I think we should, you know, have language for a proposal in advance of talking about it, so we can be really focused on, you know, what we're talking about, and take, you know, whatever meeting time is necessary to do, maybe it's 3 at this next week's meeting and maybe 3 at the following week's meeting. I think that is going to wind up being the most productive use of our time together. And so let's just make sure that early this coming week, we have shared, whatever proposals with proposed language we have amongst the group, so that, on next Friday, we can jump right in. And I think that will help us to, move where we need to go. I also would suggest that even though the subcommittees are going to have to meet independently to talk about how to pull together the information that we're in, the excellent outline. Most of, the content type information that's going to go into the report could be done offline, but I think the discussions of the different policy proposals as we are doing this should be done online, but only when, everyone feels like they're at the same level because they've had a chance to, see it in advance and prepare. And I think that's really the most fair way to go about this. So anyway, this is all a great discussion. I feel like I'm not fully understanding a few of the different aspects that we've just talked about with various tariff, options, though I think, Mariana's also made some great points there. But anyway, do folks agree that that would be a good way to organize the next 2 meetings and how we think through some of the policy recommendations that get really into the language that's going to also help the agencies to really be able to vet things internally and provide whatever nuance we can as we discuss them.
I'll simply say I think that's completely reasonable, and I think that's ideally how we'd want to structure the agendas for the next 2 meetings. I see Steve, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Kind of a similar comment to Eric's, at least on the timing. I think if we think about the fact that there's whatever 3 weeks between now and when we might have policy proposals, I think the reality is that some of these, or many of these perhaps, are not going to reach consensus, but there may well be value in the report reflecting these proposals, discussing them, and then allowing consideration of the audience for the report, the legislators and others, to think about some of these challenges on all sides, to think about the distinctions like the one that Duncan mentioned between existing hydro and new solars, and new solar and what program exists or doesn't for each of these technologies and what could be improved. So, I know we've talked all along about reaching consensus, and I think that will be important for recommendations, but the report could still have value, I think, if it has description of some of these elements too, where we can't reach full consensus as well.
Thank you, Steve. And we are running close to time here. For clarification, I included these on the agenda to talk about them, not necessarily to vote on them. And I do think that what Eric proposed and what Mariana had proposed earlier is the right approach for the next couple of meetings, at least, very specifically, including on the agenda proposals that actually have some written language around them, so that we all have the opportunity to consider them ahead of time. So that will be my intention when I put together the agenda next week. And moving forward, I think I would move that we table the other 2 discussion points to those times when they're actually going to be discussed over the next 2 weeks. And I do have included here public comment, but it looks like, Mariana, you have a comment before I move to that.
Yeah, just a quick one, and thank you all for articulating so clearly what I have in mind. But should we go ahead and decide now what are the 3 proposals that we want to be able to discuss next meeting, and therefore would want folks to review?
I would
ahead of
recommend
time
them
and
being
circulate?
yours, since you already have it set up.
Well, I have one, right? I think so it's the deep solicitation language. We can talk about the class 1 recs, and I can do the NRES, but I also want to give Duncan time to, if he wants to do one of his, I'm happy to pull one. for the next date. But I think it would be helpful to know what it is that we're discussing, so you can all receive the information.
Laura, do you have any specific proposals that you'd like to bring up for next agenda, or do you want to hold on those till the following week?
I'm gonna have to talk with some other folks about that. Again, we did submit something already. We didn't ever really get into discussion on, but yeah, I'll let you know. I can't answer that right now.
Okay. Why don't we do this then? Why don't we give it the weekend and if I can get some written proposals from some of the people, or at least an idea that you're going to send them over before the meeting next week. And I usually put the agendas together on Wednesdays, so we have a little bit of time to be able to figure out exactly what we're going to put on there. And I think it kind of hinges on whether or not we can get some documentation in early enough for us to consider before the Friday meeting. Does that sound reasonable? Okay. With that, I'm just going to move to public comment. I don't know if anybody else has anything they want to add. Seeing none, then I would announce our next, or I would propose that our next date would be next Friday. Abby, do you know what the date is? Next Friday? I don't even know what the date is
I
today.
think it's the
16th.
The 16th. Thank you. So Friday the
Yeah.
16th at 1. I would offer maybe we do a 2-hour block if we can, although obviously some people may have limitations. So I leave that up to you. And does anybody have any limitations? I think is a better question for a 2-hour meeting.
There's a good chance I won't be at the next meeting. But
Okay.
we'll see. Right now I have that I am heading up to New Hampshire with my family at that time.
Oh.
Taking that
Yeah.
day off. But
I think-
it hasn't been finalized yet. So if I am not, again, I will make sure that at least I have Alicia at the meeting to let me know if there was anything critical I need to get to.
I'll be in Maine, but I think I had planned on taking the meeting from Maine anyway, so.
Okay.
You're making me jealous. I want to go somewhere now.
It is a long weekend. It's the beginning of a long weekend, so
I didn't even know.
your wife might have something planned.
I'll find out then. All right. Well, with that, I guess I'll give you all 4 minutes back of your lives, and look forward to talking to you this week.
Thanks, Len.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Len. Thanks,
Have a
everybody.
great weekend.
Take care.